This talk today is going to look at primary archival sources, looking at the Napoleonic Wars, but we'll also be looking at other stuff online and printed sources and stuff from that I've came across in my travels regarding the Napoleonic Wars. This was a talk we had originally planned for the anniversary of Waterloo on June the 18th in PRONI, but obviously with COVID and so on, things didn't go quite to plan. So luckily for me, I had a lot of the research done. So we'll take a look at the French Revolutionary Wars, their impact on Ireland, kind of right through to the Battle of Waterloo. So we'll also look at things like the death of Admiral Nelson, the Peninsular Wars in Spain and Portugal, Napoleon's escape from Elba, and various other things along the way. And we will hear some voices of people who were caught up in such momentous events. So the first thing we have, this was a slide that I actually had got from a talk I did on prisons in Ireland last year. And this is a prison ship, HMS Postlethwaite. So this is from July the 1st, 1799. So I have to consult my notes on this talk because it's the first time I've done it. But what's interesting, this was how the United Irishmen rebellion was put down. And these prisoners were put on this prison ship, Postlethwaite, in Belfast Harbour. And what's interesting about it is the selection. It's quite a faint document, but there is a selection of names that you do get what we consider Irish names or Catholic names as Taggart, McKeag, Harper, but also beside that you've Presbyterian names like Edward Leslie, McVeigh, Andrew Robertson. So you do have that sense of the United Irish movement, both sort of sides of it coming together, but also being imprisoned to await their fate. This was an interesting document. Again, it's looking at the French Revolutionary Wars and how they impacted Ireland. This is regarding Wolfe Tone. Now, Wolfe Tone's in prison this time, facing a court-martial. And because of his situation fighting for the French Republic and as an officer of the French army, rather than be hanged, which he knows is going to be his fate, he appeals to the authorities to execute him as a soldier of the French army. So I have a little snippet of this. It's very impassioned. And he says, Wolfe Tone says, "I have but one short observation to make to the court. I stand before them in the same situation as Comte Soubresaut at Quiberon. The French government granted him the death of a soldier, and he had the honour to be shot to death by a file of grenadiers. Even Charlotte was allowed the same indulgence. I trust the court, if they have the power, will not refuse me a similar favour, if not on my own account, at least from respect to the uniform I wear and the brave army in which I had the honour to serve." So it's really rather impassioned document from Wolfe Tone. However, this wasn't granted to him by the authorities, and he committed suicide in his cell because he wasn't going to be given a soldier's death. So this is an interesting document. This is relating to from 1803. This is basically an agricultural survey, and there was fear of French invasion in Britain for probably over 100 years at this time. But by 1803, with the Treaty of Amiens being broken, there was a French army starting to mass on the coasts, and there was a real threat of invasion. Now, this is an agricultural survey from parishes in County Down, and they were asked to conduct a survey of what they refer to as livestock, which is animals, goats, pigs, cows, and dead stock, which is crops, oats and barley, because the authorities want to know how much material is there and how quickly they can get it out if the French invade, how quickly they can scorch. It's basically a scorched earth policy. So if a French army lands, it doesn't have any fodder or food at hand. It's all been moved. In some weird way, this is kind of relating back to the Doomsday Book of the Normans in the 11th century, who wanted to know every field, every farm, every outbuilding. And this is kind of a similar thing to that, almost 700 years after that. Again, this is relating to fear of French invasion. And there is panic, and people think the French are coming in balloons and rafts, military rafts, warships. Also, curiosity, at the bottom of the screen, this is like a prototype of the Channel Tunnel. As if they're coming through under the channel. Now, the Channel Tunnel wasn't realised in the 1980s, and this is in 1804, so it just shows you that it's almost like has a science fiction kind of feel to it. But at the time, for a lot of people, the fear of invasion was actually real. So on to the death of Nelson. This is a letter sent to Lord Castlereagh at Mount Stuart. This is from someone in England. Just it's only signed FL, so I'm not quite sure who that is, but it's really talking about the death of Nelson. And indeed, if I may quote from it, it says, "Never was there indeed an event so mournfully, so triumphantly important to England as the Battle of Trafalgar. The sentiment of lamenting the individual more than rejoicing at the victory shows the humanity and affection of the people of England." And I was watching something recently, and the historian Andrew Roberts was talking about this, and he compared the death of Nelson and the emotions of the people, and he made this analogy of something like the Battle of Britain, winning the World Cup, and the death of Princess Diana in one day. He just says such was this wave of emotion felt by the death of Nelson. So when I was on my travels, this is from the Maritime Museum in London. I came across this, which was a medal for a Michael Laycock, who had a Trafalgar Medal, born in Antrim, 34 years old, landsman in the Colossus. The Colossus now was the 6th ship of the line of Vice Admiral Collingwood. So the opposite line from Nelson, the 2 lines went in, and it was the 6th ship from the line. So it was pretty much in the action pretty early on. And the landsman was basically the lowest job you could have on ship. It was kind of labourer of the ship. So it was a very, very tough job at a very tough time. But I did some research on this, having seen this at the Royal Naval Archives in London, and there is a bit of a story. Well, Michael goes on to survive Trafalgar, and as far as we know, serves on the Sparrowhawk and then HMS Canada. So goes on to have still a naval career. Marries a girl from London. I think her name is Jane. It's in the naval records. So it was just because it's so unusual name, Laycock. It's in County Antrim. It's a very, very unusual name, but it always nice to sort of follow up on that. So here we have the Thomas Lawrence painting of the Duke of Wellington. Again, one of the giant figures of his age, particularly in the Napoleonic era. Born in Dublin, 1769. It's the famous painting of Thomas Lawrence. So grew up in Dangan Castle in County Meath. And really one of the leading military and political figures in 19th century Britain. He will feature throughout this, so we'll be coming back to the Duke. Here's a really soulful painting I like, Thomas Lawrence of Lord Castlereagh, who history maybe hasn't been so kind to. But as a young man, admirer of Rousseau and the Enlightenment, and high, full of ideals and libertine philosophy, but shaped by his experiences being in Paris during the French Revolution and the excesses of that. And then also with the rebellion, United Irishmen in Ireland, where he was heavily involved to suppress that. And he always says about Ireland, he says, blamed for the bloodshed in 1798. Castlereagh says, with respect to Ireland, I know I shall never be forgiven. So history hasn't really judged him kindly. But we'll see later in his career as a diplomat and a top politician, particularly at the Congress of Vienna, when they're trying to put Europe back together again, he plays such a major role. So in 1807, Napoleon invades Spain because he wants to stop the British any trade, the blockade of Britain, because he knows he can't defeat Britain on the sea. But one way he can possibly defeat Britain is by blockading trade. And one way to do this is to invade Portugal and Spain. And he replaces the Spanish royal family with his brother, Joseph, who crowns King of Spain. So at this point in Britain, these are military dispatches archives I came across. And this is really interesting because Wellington is saying we need to go and fight them in Portugal and Spain. Even if we lose, we will still tie down such a huge amount of French material and manpower that it's worth doing. It really is a campaign we have to go. Which is quite brave of a general or of a military commanding figure to admit he's going and it might fail, mightn't work out. Again, in dispatches in Portugal, talking about how Messina, a very famed French general, is probably going to be getting a top job and style King of Portugal because Napoleon would grant these favors to his top soldiers, would give them titles. Again, it's an interesting quote there. So these are, coming to these are military geography maps I came across. And these were a subject of other people who were known as military geographers who went with Wellington's army. And their job was to record the layout, topography, and also after a battle, draw up what happened and give an account. So not only are they maps, they're also maps as a military source, as a historical source, because they're quite interesting where they're drawing, they're mapping the area, but they're also recording what actually happened. I have a series of these. This is the Battle of Albuera, which is 16th of May, 1811. It's 20 kilometers south of Badajoz on the Portuguese-Spanish border. So this is Marshal Beresford v. Marshal Soult, the French army. It was a British victory, but very narrow, very tight battle. No great strategic gain, but it did mean the British were able to really push over into Spain. So these are from Mount Stuart. I came across these. These are from Charles Stuart, who became the third Marquis of Londonderry. He was a soldier in the Peninsular War, and he brought these breastplates, French cuirassiers, which is like heavy cavalry breastplates, back with him. They're on display at Mount Stuart. It's funny, the soldiers during the Peninsular War and during the Napoleonic Wars, if they captured breastplates from cuirassiers, used to boil their beef in them. Used to call them soup bowls because they were perfect for making soup or boiling meat and beef, etc. Again, here's another military map of Cadiz, in the south of Spain, Andalusia. This is where the Spanish government was exiled. Yeah, can you, yeah. And so the Spanish government was exiled, and the French had 70,000 troops tied down, besieging Cadiz, so it's very strategically important and tied down a lot of soldiers. So this is one from the hill of Badajoz. It's another famous battle. This was commanded by Colonel Fred Ponsonby. He was a favorite of Wellington's. The German hussars. This was famous. This is famously a cavalry battle fought, and there's a famous quote here from Robert Blakeney, who's witnessing the event, the French cavalry and the German hussars. He says, "We gave the Germans a cheer. The enemy cavalry turned around and faced them stoutly, their commander placing himself at the front. As the Germans closed in the enemy, our cheers were enthusiastic. The brave French leader was instantly cut down. Our cavalry charged right through them." So that was on the 5th of March, 1811. This is Ciudad Rodrigo. This is one of the sort of infamous battles of the Peninsular War. It's the city, the river behind it. It's the siege. So this lasted for almost 11 days. In January 1812, the ground was rock hard. The British had to dig in to fortify, to besiege the city, because this was on the border and a gateway into Spain. So it was strategically important to take this city in this battle. This was the 18th, 19th. This was the 8th to 19th of January, 1812. Again, this was an example of the forlorn hope, where it was basically suicide to go into the breach, but whoever got into the breach, the chance of glory and promotion and cash was huge, but there was like a 90% fatality rate if you went through the walls, because it was such a severe part of the battle to go on, known as the forlorn hope. But troops did it, because troops took the risk, but because of the riches that would be awarded to the people who were the first people into the city. But as I say, the casualty rate was 90%, so it was almost deemed to be a suicide mission. There's an illustration of this coming up. I believe this is the Conic Rangers. The illustration talking about the French resistance, the hole in the wall, being bombarded from above, and also below. You can't see this, There's the chevaux frise, which is like bits of metal and glass and bayonets. So if you fell down off onto that, you really were in trouble. But it kind of gives you some picture of what a suicide mission it actually was. And this is the Siege of Badahoff. It's another famous battle fought on the 16th of March to the 6th of April, 1812. So the Allies of the British Army, the 20,000 cannonballs hurled at the walls in 3 weeks. It was complete carnage siege. They finally breached the Trinidad Bastion, which is around here. And again, like the previous illustration, it was a forlorn hope mission up into the city. It's 30 feet high walls, deep ditches, and the chevaux frise, the spikes all below. So he fell off, pushed off, certain death. Again, an illustration of that, which really kind of typifies that carnage and chaos of Napoleonic warfare. Again, this is a military geography map of Salamanca. It's another famous battle into Spain from Wellington. And that's from Salamanca, it's the road to Madrid. So they're pushing the French out of Portugal, out of Spain, into Madrid, up into France, pushing them back. And part of my travels in Porto, city of Porto, there's a memorial to the heroes of the Peninsular War. Although you can't see at the top, there's a French eagle and like an Allied lion, you know, fighting on top of the column. It's very striking. So this brings me now to time in Bratislava. There was a military reenactment of the Battle of Pressburg, which was Napoleon against the Habsburgs in 1809. It's Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia. I didn't know this was going on, but I arrived and I was told, oh, this thing's happening, would you like to go? And I was like, taxi, quick. You know, it was just incredible to see this, because I've never seen Napoleonic reenactment. And it does give you that sense of color and theater. There's cuirassiers, French cavalry waiting in the woods. And you do get that spectacle. It does add a bit of color to it. And with the smoke and the noise, the French cavalry get in. So it was just as a spectacle. I just thought I'd share it with you because it does add that wee bit of color when we're primarily looking at archival documents. So the Siege of Pressburg was curiously a rare defeat for Napoleon. Couldn't take it. So on his way home, he had a bit of a strop. He destroyed this rather lovely old castle, which is 10 kilometers outside Bratislava. It sits on the River Danube, Devon Castle. It's actually a nice walk through the woods from the city to the castle. And if you catch it in late afternoon, it's a very eerie kind of presence because it's just still a ruin. So again, it's a rare defeat for Napoleon by the Habsburgs. So he kind of got a bit annoyed about that and destroyed this castle just for badness maybe, but there we go. So this is one I came across. This is Lord Clanwilliam, who had been a diplomat, a top diplomat to France. And during his stay in Paris, he does witness Napoleon reviewing the Imperial Guards, those really tall, elegant, elite soldiers. And then he thinks about them, and he's writing about the ones who went to Russia and who didn't make it back to France, because the casualty rate of Napoleon's invasion of Russia was catastrophic, really. But I just think it's interesting. Lord Clanwilliam was there, and he talks about the Imperial Guard. That's the famous painting of Marshal Ney defending the last French lines out of Russia, being attacked by Cossacks, but more importantly, being attacked by the Russian winter. So on to the Congress of Vienna. This was the peace settlement to put Europe back together, which started roughly in about October 1814 and ended about 6 days before the Battle of Waterloo in June 1815. So there's 200 states represented to try and put an end to the carnage of the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars, the French Revolutionary Wars, had lasted for 25 years. There was such upheaval. Things needed to be resolved. Questions of Poland, questions of Switzerland, Saxony, the slave trade, France's natural borders. What's going to happen to France after this? So we'll come to this throughout the talk. We'll come back to it. This is an interesting document. This is Napoleon, when he escapes from Elba and then launches his so-called 100 Days campaign, which culminates in the Battle of Waterloo. But this would have been a dispatch sent to the conference, the Congress of Vienna in French diplomatic language, and they would have read, these high-ranking officials would have read this dispatch, and I'm sure their hearts would have sank, because they would have seen these about Napoleon Bonaparte, Entree, Main Armée, France. He is back, and he's intent on trouble. And it must have been absolutely a feeling of fear and panic. And here we go again. The little corporal is back. It's quite a staggering document. We have a copy of it. Fantastic stuff. So March 1814, the mood about Napoleon. There's just absolutely, people are insane. People are in this country on the subject of any peace with Bonaparte. The Methodists and the women are particularly warlike. So there's this feeling that we're not going to have peace until he is dealt with. Because Napoleon is seen as the ogre, as the monster. And the fact that he escapes to come back to make more trouble doesn't really do anything to dispel that image of him. So this is from the Congress of Vienna. This is the greeting card system, where the carte de visite, they would put cards out in the diplomatic language of French to invite each other to their little soirees. Famously, the Congress of Vienna solved, or was the architect of putting peace together in Europe, more or less for 100 years until the First World War, with the exception of the Franco-Prussian War and the Crimean War. But it did keep Europe in some peaceable way for 100 years. But it's also known as the Dancing Congress, because there was so much frivolity and drinking and dinners and so on. It was quite a decadent time. That's the Duchess of Parma, which is Napoleon's second wife, the Habsburg, Marie Louise, and she was, to get her off the scene, she was granted the Duchy of Parma only in her lifetime, not for a hereditary title for her son, so it died with her. This is the Duke of Wellington inviting his mate Charles Stuart, the Marquis of Londonderry, for a wee soiree, on the 26th of November in French. So I kind of feel it's like me inviting my friend who speaks English, I speak English, through a text message, but doing it in French. It just seems really pretentious, but it's the diplomatic language of the time, and anything to do with the Habsburg court in Vienna has to be strictly observed. It's extremely formal. So this is one of the articles. Prince Talleyrand, who was representing France, who had almost an impossible job to bring France back to the table of world nations in a peaceful manner, and controversial figure, but no doubt a talented one. One of the issues they're talking about is the slave trade. Now, this is slave trade in empires and colonies, the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, and so on. This is 1815. As you know, slavery wasn't fully abolished in Britain until 1838, I think. So it's a long road to go, but this was one of the things up for discussion at the Congress. This is one of the dispatches. Here we have these visiting cards. This is Metternich, who's the Austrian representative. He's the head of that, a real giant of a political figure during that time. And there's the Wellington one. Let's see what else. So this is the diplomatic teams. So you've Metternich, Austria, Hardenberg, Prussia, Talleyrand, France, Wellington, Stuart, Cathcart, Clancarty. He's part of the British delegation. Nesselrode for Russia. So like that's quite almost like a diplomatic dream team there. You've kind of got really hard hitting figures on this team. These are the major ones. There was, as I say, there was 200 states represented at the Congress. These are the 5 allied powers who will, well, with the exception of France, they will decide the fate of Europe, the destiny of Europe, by coming together at this Congress. So these are the famous chairs. These are currently in Mount Stuart, County Down. These were brought back by Lord Castlereagh. I don't know how I did it, but it's a bit of foresight. They're remarkable objects. These were restored during the National Trust's restoration of Mount Stuart in 2015. These were restored at I think the cost of £6,800 each. Such is the amount of work involved, the upholstery, the lacquer, the wood, all that stuff. There's just such a piece of work. And it's one of the Austrian ones there. But I always think if you're going to sign a peace treaty, you're probably more inclined to sign it if you're on a comfortable seat than if you're on an uncomfortable seat. But they really are worth seeing. So dispatches between Lord Stuart, Viscount Castlereagh. Look at the dates: June the 2nd, June the 23rd, 1815. It's a really critical time. It's almost like the end game is coming in Europe now. Castlereagh's in Britain. Lord Stuart's the ambassador at the Congress. He's in Vienna, but writing dispatches because he's hearing what's going on with these Allied armies making their way across Europe to finally deal with Napoleon. Now, these are the giant Austrian and Russian armies. This is one about the how the King of France, the Bourbon King, who's automatically being restored, Louis XVIII, not a very popular figure at all, but he's saying how the armies will have to requisition themselves as if when they get to France, because all Allied armies are heading for France to deal with Napoleon. It's in the dispatches there. It's an archive. So this interesting guy, this is Joachim Murray, very famous French general, French marshal, and King of Naples, very loyal to Napoleon from the start, from the very early days. And under Napoleon, an innkeeper's son could become a king, which wouldn't happen in Austria, Russia, Prussia, Britain. But of the 26 Grand Marshals of France under Napoleon, the top military figures, 10 of them had parents who were innkeepers, milliners, wheelwrights, bailiffs, just working people. So that's extraordinary. And they did go on to become dukes, and in this case, kings. Said it wouldn't happen in other or the monarchies who were opposed to Napoleon. It just wouldn't happen. So these are the Allied armies marching on France. Now these are coming. This is the 18th of June, which is the Battle of Waterloo in the west. But these are coming through Europe. The Austrians alone have 120,000 men. The Austrians coming through the Alps. The Russian army coming through Germany to link up, I think, of 200,000. It's just colossal juggernaut heading for Napoleon. So Napoleon, being the great gambler that he is, he has to knock out the British, the Allied army and the Prussians at Waterloo, because this is the great gamble, because what's coming towards him is absolutely enormous. It's the document there. So that's an interesting one. This was Ross of Bladenburg papers. And this was from this dates from the 1880s, but it's in a military college, and it's basically as your homework assignment and as military college is to look at the Battle of Quatre Bras and the Battle of Ligny, which are the two battles that just lead up to the Battle of Waterloo. And I just think, what a dream homework. And why didn't I get that when I was, why didn't I get homeworks like that? I mean, the Battle of Waterloo is still being taught to this day, but in 1880 it was firmly established in military schools. So this is an interesting one. This is Army Regulations, 1815. It's quite a faint document, but I have had a good look at it, and it is: your soldier to receive daily 2 pounds of bread, half a pound of meat, beans, barley, potatoes, or any other vegetables, and an eighth of a quart of brandy. Now that's significant because that works out at something like 150 milliliters of brandy a day, where in the Navy, they only got 70 milliliters of rum. So you can see why the Navy had to press gang people to go to the Navy, but the Army, they got twice as much brandy. So there you go. It's the famous newspaper report from the Times. Now, if we look at the date, it's 22nd of June. Battle of Waterloo fought on the 18th. So there is a time lag. Word gets out, dispatches are sent. So by the 20th of June, there's rumors. It's slowly being confirmed by the 21st. Then they're printing this headline, the 22nd, about the battle. It's a painting by Elizabeth Thompson. I just read something from the Times. So this is from the copy of the Times. That's the Scotland Forever, the charge of the Union brigades at Waterloo. So we just look at the Times. It was a bit in that. It says, many of the British officers present in the affairs of the 16th declared that they never witnessed more severe fighting in the peninsula than which took place on the plains of Fleurus and its vicinity. What made the fate of the 79th and 42nd Regiments so severe was having been taken by surprise by a strong force of cuirassiers who lay in ambush for them. The whole, which was completely intercepted by fields of corn. Immediately, with such fury was the 79th Regiment attacked. Most of them were cut to pieces, and the whole regiment in danger of being destroyed, but for the coming up of the brave 42nd. So we are starting to see these kind of witness reports of Waterloo. It's an interesting, it's a letter sent. This is a letter sent from John MacDonald to Emerson Tennant. It's actually much, much later, but the reason that it was kept, Emerson Tennant writes the note, because John MacDonald's one of the soldiers who kept the door shut at the Hougoumont farm, which is really key to the whole center of the Allied defense at Waterloo. The French had the major thrust. So he even writes the bravest soldier in the British Army is what Wellington described him as. Again, this is a French cannon just captured at Waterloo. This is the Enniskillen museums. The museum in Enniskillen. The 27th Enniskillens lost more than 2/3 of all men. It was the highest proportion of any comparable formation at Waterloo. And indeed, an eyewitness, Johnny Kincaid, had said, I'd never yet heard of a battle in which everyone was killed, but this seemed likely to be an exception, as all were going by turns, from the lovely book by Brendan Sims. Again, here we have, it's an eyewitness account. This is a transcript written in Brussels just after the Battle of Waterloo. And it's an interesting one because it mentions, it's just from a soldier, it's an anonymous source, but it mentions that a friend of mine had the courage to ask the Duke of Waterloo whether in that conjecture he looked to the woods when the Prussians were expected. No was the answer. I looked at my watch. If my troops could keep their position till nighttime, then they might be joined by Blucher. And this is famously used in that famous film, 1970 film by Sergei Bondarchuk about the Battle of Waterloo, the grand sweeping film. And Wellington says, Christopher Plummer is acting Wellington, and he says, critical time in the battle, give me night or give me Blucher. I always thought that was a cinematic device used, but apparently it's not. Apparently soldiers had asked him, and he was saying, by nighttime, Blucher joins us, we will prevail. We can win, because it always said it's such a close run thing, Waterloo. Another very poignant account. Again, this is from Lady Louise Connolly to her friend Sarah Napier. And this is asking about news of loved ones at the battle. And this is from the 5th of July, 1815. So this is nearly 3 weeks after the battle. And she mentions, upon receipt of your letter, Emily and I went directly to Mrs. Berwick to inquire about poor Grenard. When we found she had no idea of the misfortune having taken place, we cling to the hope that he was taken prisoner. So the absolute anguish of these battles and the time afterwards, not knowing what's happened, and they're clinging to the hope of a loved one that he's taken prisoner. That's the best they can hope for. And we don't know the fate of this particular person. Here's another one. And again, it's an eyewitness account, and it's talking about the Battle of Waterloo. Let's see the next one of that. So let's go back to that one there. And in this particular one, again, the first thing it writes is about a son writing to his mother who fought in the battle. And again, he's saying that me and your brothers are safe. It's the first line, the first thing on the other page of a letter is that we are safe, because news is traveling so slow. So when you're writing a letter to someone, you really have to tell them the first thing they want to hear is who has died, who is safe, are your brothers safe? So it's really important stuff. So again, that's the Battle of Waterloo by William Sadler, Irish artist, of course. Waterloo, it's only 3 miles, I think it's 3 miles wide, 2.5 miles across, long. It's one of the smallest battlefields Napoleon ever fought on. Napoleon loved these big, expansive battles. And again, he couldn't bring his maneuverability to bear. He had to it was just a frontal assault. So it's a very un-Napoleon battle in that sense, where he can't really bring his maneuverability, which he was famous for, to bear, because it is just basically frontal assaults each time. So the outcome of the Congress is France. The Congress in Vienna would be a talk all by itself, but the outcome for France is they were reinstated as a diplomatic power with the Bourbon kings in place, which was a considering outcome which wasn't bad for France considering what Napoleon had put them through. But Talleyrand, the politician, had said to the diplomats at the Congress, if your argument is with Napoleon, then he's not here. If your argument is with France, then what do you hope to solve? Because Napoleon and France are two different things. So France is reinstated under Bourbon monarchy, which is back to what Castlereagh say, to bring Europe back to peaceable ways. Congress of Vienna, there is a legacy. It has been accused from the left, from the right, conservative car boot sale, origins of the United Nations, which undoubtedly was. European state system, absolutely. Origins of the European Union, yeah. Guarantees of international law, primacy of foreign power, preserver of peace, but also seen as a tool of oppression or an international system. So it's kind of all of those things, depending on your point of view. But the main objective of it was to bring peace to Europe, which it managed to do for arguably 100 years, notwithstanding the Crimean and the Franco-Prussian War. But not until the First World War, where we had these rules reversed, where Britain's natural ally, Germany, is now, it's reversed, and France is now an ally of Britain. So these from the Napoleonic Wars, these alliances completely turned on their head. That was taken 10 years ago when I visited. I did hope to go this year in May, but that was put paid to by obvious reasons. So again, that was not, I'm looking at the battlefield now, which is just still farmers' fields, and it's quite a pretty sight. Now, there is an exhibition centre and the farmhouses are still there. Again, that's the line. It's for the Prince of Orange, so for the Dutch had paid for that, which is, sort of dominates the landscape. But in making that, they changed the topography of it by taking all the earth and so on and moving it around. So there's some PRONI sources that we have looked at during this talk. So there's a letter from Wolfe Tone. It's a Death of Admiral Nelson letter. These are the reference numbers that they're held in. The Ciudad Rodrigo map, the Badahoff map, and Napoleon's escape from Elba. There's the front cover of the Times, Battle of Waterloo, it's the reference. There's Thomas Wildman letter, an eyewitness report, and there's Duke of Wellington, Congress of Vienna cards, and things like that. So let's see if we have time. It's 2:45, so I just think it'd be a nice way to end this. If I was going to sing a ballad, just a Napoleonic ballad, which is a French naval song originally called Jean-Francois de Nantes, but it was adopted by British soldiers, Allied soldiers after the war. Don't worry, it's not a bawdy song. It's a clean song, and it's kind of a lament, really. But I think it's fitting to end this talk by doing this song. Boney was a warrior away, a warrior terrier, Jean-Francois. Boney fought the Russians away, the Russians and the Prussians, Jean-Francois. Moscow was a-blazing away, Boney was a-raging, Jean-Francois. Boney went to Elba away, Boney he came back again, Jean-Francois. Boney went to Waterloo away, there he got his overthrow, Jean-Francois. He went to St. Helena away, there he was a prisoner, Jean-Francois. Boney broke his heart and died away, away in St. Helena, Jean-Francois.